In the early hours of Valentine's Day 2013, the tranquility of the Silver Woods country estate in Pretoria, South Africa, was shattered by the unmistakable sound of gunfire, for sharp, rapid shots that cut through the still night air. Inside one of the luxurious homes behind the estate's high walls, a young woman lay dying behind a locked bathroom door. Her name was Reeva Steenkamp. Her killer, according to South African prosecutors, was none other than her boyfriend, international sporting hero Oscar Pistorius. To the world, Oscar Pistorius was a marvel of human achievement. Born without fibulas, both of his legs had been amputated below the knees before his first birthday. But against every conceivable odd, he grew into an elite athlete. His blade-like prosthetics carried him to glory on the world stage. At the 2012 London Olympics, he made history by becoming the first double amputee to compete against able-bodied runners. Sponsors, fans, and media celebrated him as a symbol of resilience and triumph. He was known as the Blade Runner, a man who had overcome adversity to redefine what was physically possible. But behind the public adoration was a far more complicated man. One who, by the end of 2013, would be on trial not for gold medals, but for murder. At around 3 a.m. on February 14, Pistorius made a frantic call to security. His voice was panicked. He said he had accidentally shot his girlfriend, thinking she was an intruder. When first responders arrived, they found Reeva Steenkamp at the bottom of the staircase, barely clothed, with severe gunshot wounds to her arm, hip, and head. Blood was smeared across the bathroom floor, down the stairs, and soaked into the towels Pistorius had reportedly used in an attempt to stop her bleeding. But it was too late. Reeva was pronounced dead at the scene. Reeva wasn't just a pretty face. She was a qualified law graduate, a model, and a rising media personality. She was also a passionate advocate for women's rights, outspoken against gender-based violence, an ironic and chilling detail that gained global attention in the aftermath of her death. Just hours before she was killed, Reeva had tweeted about Valentine's Day, excited to spend it with her love. Instead, her name would be etched into South Africa's long and painful history of intimate partner violence. Pistorius was taken into custody almost immediately. His version of events was simple but implausible. He had woken up in the middle of the night and believed an intruder had entered through the bathroom window. In his fear, he had fired through the door, not realizing Reeva wasn't beside him in bed. He insisted it was a tragic accident, a fatal misunderstanding. But as investigators combed through the scene, inconsistencies emerged. Reeva had been shot through a locked toilet door. She had been standing inside a small cubicle, trapped, cornered. The bullets had been fired in quick succession through the wooden panel, one after another. 3 out of 4 shots had struck her. The final bullet entered her skull, killing her almost instantly. There were no signs of forced entry in the house. None of the security systems had been triggered. Her bags, slippers, phone, and overnight belongings were all in the bedroom. She was dressed only in a camisole and shorts, clearly not in the act of sneaking out or hiding from a threat. Most damning of all were the testimonies of neighbors, who claimed they had heard loud arguing before the gunshots rang out. Some said they heard a woman screaming. Others described Pistorius's voice, filled with rage. These accounts directly contradicted his story of sudden fear and confusion. In the days that followed, the media exploded with speculation. Was this a celebrity unraveling under the pressure of fame? Or had Pistorius's darker nature simply been concealed behind a polished public image? Allegations began to surface, stories of volatile behavior, a fascination with firearms, and a history of controlling conduct in romantic relationships. The man who had once stood as a national inspiration was now facing the possibility of life in prison. On February 15, Oscar Pistorius was officially charged with murder. He appeared in court looking devastated, covering his face with his hands and crying uncontrollably. But prosecutor Jerry Nell wasn't swayed. He accused Pistorius of cold-blooded, premeditated murder. According to Nell, Pistorius had intentionally shot Reeva after an argument, and the locked door she stood behind had not been a barrier for his conscience. The prosecution highlighted several incidents from Oscar's past. There were reports that he once accidentally discharged a firearm in a restaurant and asked a friend to take the blame. Another time, he had fired a weapon through a car's sunroof during an altercation. These weren't isolated incidents, they pointed to a pattern of impulsive, reckless, and dangerous behavior. In contrast, the defense team argued that Pistorius was emotionally vulnerable and hypervigilant due to his disability. They said he had grown up in a crime-ridden country, developed a deep fear of home invasions, and reacted instinctively when he heard a noise in the bathroom. But key questions remained. Why didn't he check if Reeva was in bed? Why didn't she call out to him from behind the door? And if he was that terrified, why didn't he retreat or call security first? In a country plagued by femicide, Reeva's death struck a nerve. South Africa has one of the highest rates of intimate partner violence in the world. For many women, her story was disturbingly familiar. She had beauty, education, a promising career, but none of it had protected her. Her parents, Barry and June Steenkamp, appeared in interviews visibly shattered, questioning how anyone could shoot their daughter and then claim it was a mistake. As the bail hearing concluded, Pistorius was granted conditional release. But his reputation was in ruins. The sponsors pulled out. Public support vanished. And the world waited to see what would unfold in court. Behind the headlines, one truth remained: Reeva Steenkamp was dead. Killed in the prime of her life, on a day meant for love. The man she had trusted, the man she had gone to bed beside, had fired the bullets that ended her future. The trial would begin the following year. And what it revealed would forever change how Oscar Pistorius was remembered, not as a legend, but as a man whose actions may have masked something far more sinister than anyone could have imagined. On March 3, 2014, the trial of Oscar Pistorius began inside the Pretoria High Court. It was a trial that would grip South Africa and the world for months, broadcast live with every word dissected and debated. At the center of it all stood Pistorius, the fallen hero, the man once cheered in stadiums around the globe, now dressed in a sober suit, his face pale, his demeanor subdued. Opposite him sat the Steenkamp family, stoic but visibly broken, as the legal system attempted to piece together what had really happened on that violent Valentine's morning. The prosecution, led by veteran state advocate Jerry Nell, wasted no time setting the tone. Nell portrayed Pistorius not as a man acting in terror, but as someone prone to explosive anger, who knew exactly what he was doing when he fired 4 hollow-point bullets through a locked door. The word premeditated loomed large throughout the trial. Nell argued that the couple had fought that night, that Reeva had tried to retreat to the bathroom to escape his wrath, and that Pistorius had followed with a gun in hand and deadly intent in his heart. It wasn't just Nell's words that painted this picture. The prosecution brought a string of witnesses, neighbors, forensic experts, ballistics analysts, even Reeva's best friends. One woman, a neighbor named Michelle Berger, described being woken by a woman's blood-curdling screams, followed by gunshots. Another, Johan Stipp, a local doctor, testified that he arrived on the scene shortly after the shooting and found Reeva barely alive. She had no pulse. Blood pooled beneath her, and Pistorius, in a daze, kept repeating that he thought she was an intruder. The physical evidence told its own story. Ballistics experts demonstrated that the shots were fired in a downward trajectory, suggesting that Pistorius had been on his stumps when he pulled the trigger, contradicting claims that he was too panicked to think clearly. They also revealed the proximity of the shots and the force of the bullets, how they shattered bone and skull, leaving no chance of survival. The bathroom door, presented in court, had been removed from Pistorius's home and brought into the courtroom. The holes in it, clustered close together, gave a chilling visual to the force and precision of the attack. Perhaps most damaging to Pistorius's case was the timeline. The defense claimed that after he fired, Pistorius realized Reeva wasn't in bed, put on his prosthetic legs, broke down the door with a cricket bat, and tried to revive her. But the prosecution countered that this sequence of events didn't align with the physical evidence. They argued that he must have known Reeva was in the bathroom when he fired. There was no indication of an intruder, no movement in the house, no disturbance outside. Under cross-examination, Pistorius took the stand. It was a rare and risky move, but the defense hoped his testimony would humanize him. He wept openly, often uncontrollably, during questioning. His voice trembled. At times, he was unable to speak. He said he loved Reeva. That he had no reason to harm her. That his world had collapsed in a single moment of fear-driven misjudgment. But Jerry Nell was relentless. He tore into Pistorius's version of events, pointing out inconsistencies, contradictions, and omissions. Why didn't he verify where Reeva was before opening fire? Why didn't she scream out to him from the toilet if she heard him yelling at an intruder? Why did the shots come in rapid succession with no pause to reassess? Nell accused Pistorius of tailoring his evidence to fit the narrative of innocence. "You are not the victim here," he told him coldly. "Reeva is." The defense, led by Barry Rue, focused on Pistorius's disability, his anxiety, and his supposed vulnerability. They brought in psychologists and criminologists to describe his state of mind, his history of trauma, and his long-standing fear of crime. Rue argued that Pistorius, having grown up in a country plagued by violence, had developed a deep-rooted terror of being attacked in his own home. He acted, they claimed, not with malice but with panic. But that line of reasoning did little to explain away the text messages found on Reeva's phone, messages in which she expressed fear of Pistorius's temper. In one, sent just weeks before her death, she wrote, "I'm scared of you sometimes and how you snap at me." Another described how she felt picked on and attacked. These were not the words of a woman in a stable, loving relationship. They were red flags, signs that Reeva had seen a side of Oscar that the public had never known. The defense pressed on, highlighting Pistorius's charitable work, his achievements, and his regrets. They described him as a man emotionally shattered by what he had done. But the damage was done. The inconsistencies in his story, the brutality of the shooting, the locked door, the texts, it all created a portrait that was hard to reconcile with the image of a frightened man reacting on instinct. The courtroom was silent as the arguments came to a close. Reporters crowded the hallways. Protesters outside waved placards reading, "Justice for Reeva," and "No excuse for murder." The country was divided. Some believed Pistorius's story. Others saw him as a symbol of male entitlement and unchecked violence. But everyone knew one thing: whatever the outcome, this trial would not end in celebration, it would end in tragedy. On September 12, 2014, Judge Thokozile Masipa delivered her verdict. She found Pistorius not guilty of murder. Instead, he was convicted of culpable homicide, South Africa's equivalent of manslaughter. The judge ruled that while he had acted negligently, the state had failed to prove intent beyond a reasonable doubt. Pistorius collapsed in court. Reeva's family sat in stunned silence. The public reaction was immediate and furious. Social media erupted. Women's rights groups condemned the ruling as a miscarriage of justice. For many, the verdict seemed to say that Reeva's life was worth less than her killer's fear. That a man could shoot a woman through a door and walk away with a lighter sentence so long as he claimed it was a mistake. The sentence? 5 years in prison. But under South African law, Pistorius would be eligible for parole after just 10 months. The world had watched a hero fall. But for the Steenkamp family, the pain had only just begun. Their daughter was gone. Her final moments had been filled with terror. And the man who took her life was going to prison for less time than she had lived with him. But the story wasn't over. As outrage mounted and appeals loomed, the fight for justice was far from finished. The backlash to the initial verdict was swift, fierce, and relentless. Across South Africa and around the world, people voiced outrage. How could a man fire 4 deadly rounds into a locked bathroom and be convicted only of culpable homicide? Protesters filled the streets, social media exploded, and legal analysts dissected Judge Thokozile Masipa's ruling with scalpel-like precision. For Reeva's family, it was a fresh wound layered on top of the one they were already struggling to survive. The outcry wasn't just about Oscar Pistorius. It was about what his case represented, a glaring symbol of how justice often fails women, how power and fame can bend the scales. State Prosecutor Jerry Nell wasn't ready to let the matter rest. He filed for an appeal, arguing that the court had made a critical error in law. The intent to kill didn't require knowing who was behind the door, only the knowledge that someone was there. And Oscar had admitted as much. The appeal went to South Africa's Supreme Court of Appeal in Bloemfontein. On December 3, 2015, the justices delivered a powerful reversal. They found Oscar Pistorius guilty of murder. Justice Eric Leach, delivering the judgment, stated plainly that Pistorius should have foreseen that firing into a confined space, behind a locked door, would likely kill whoever was inside. That was dolus eventualis, legal intent to kill. It didn't matter whether he thought it was Reeva or an intruder. He had made a fatal decision. He would be resentenced. In July 2016, Pistorius appeared once again in court, this time walking on his stumps to gain sympathy from the judge. He sobbed. He spoke of remorse. His defense team brought in psychologists and correctional officers to argue that he wasn't a danger to society. They described a man broken by guilt, unable to forgive himself, a shell of the celebrated athlete he once was. But the prosecution wasn't buying it. Jerry Nell reminded the court that Reeva Steenkamp had no voice, only Oscar's tears remained on display. He asked for no leniency. In the end, Pistorius received a 6-year sentence for murder, still a far cry from the 15-year minimum typically expected under South African law. That sentence, too, didn't last. Public anger once again flared, and the National Prosecuting Authority appealed for a harsher punishment. In 2017, the Supreme Court agreed. The sentence was increased to 13 years and 5 months. Finally, it seemed, a measure of justice had been served, at least on paper. But Reeva Steenkamp's family never celebrated. There was no real victory to be found in a longer prison term. "We miss her every day," her mother, June, told the media. "Our daughter is never coming back. No sentence can change that." Reeva was more than just a victim in a headline. She was a paralegal who had just been offered a new TV gig. She had dreams of starting a foundation to protect abused women. She had a voice, one she planned to use. And all of that was taken from her in a matter of seconds behind a locked bathroom door. As the years passed, Pistorius faded from the spotlight. No more magazine covers. No more sponsorships. In prison, he reportedly spent his time teaching fellow inmates about the Bible and working in the facility's library. He applied for parole in 2023, but the request was denied. Still, under South African law, he remained eligible to apply again. Then came January 2024. 10 years after the shooting, Oscar Pistorius was granted parole, effective from January 5. His release sparked yet another wave of outrage. He would serve the remainder of his sentence under strict parole conditions, including monitoring, therapy, and prohibitions on speaking to the media. The Department of Correctional Services assured the public that his release was procedural and legally appropriate, but for many, it felt like a gut punch. Reeva's parents were given a chance to meet Pistorius face-to-face during a victim-offender dialogue, a component of South Africa's restorative justice system. They had questions. Why didn't he take responsibility sooner? Did he ever really love their daughter? Did he understand the weight of what he'd done? No official transcript of the meeting was released. Only whispers emerged. But afterward, Reeva Steenkamp stated that she still didn't believe Pistorius had told the full truth. The case of Oscar Pistorius and Reeva Steenkamp left a nation asking hard questions. About gun culture. About domestic violence. About the way celebrity warps perception. Pistorius's fall from grace was stunning, but it came too late to save Reeva. Her face remains etched into the public memory, not as a footnote in a scandal, but as the young woman whose life ended before it ever fully began. Her name became a symbol for countless others silenced by gender-based violence in South Africa, a country where women live under constant threat. Her story forced conversations in homes, in courtrooms, and in Parliament. Her death wasn't just a tragedy, it was a catalyst. For Oscar Pistorius, the road ahead is one of obscurity. No career comeback. No redemption arc. Just the quiet burden of a name that no longer inspires, but haunts. He will live out his days under surveillance and suspicion, his fame forever eclipsed by the blood on his hands. Reeva's legacy, however, endures. Through foundations in her name, through awareness campaigns, through every woman who refuses to be silenced, her voice carries on. She was not just a victim. She was a daughter, a sister, a fighter. And while justice may have faltered, history will remember. Thank you for listening to Crime Echoes with Lewis. For more content like this, please like this video and subscribe to my channel.